Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a mystery hiding in plain sight. The Swiss Guard, the Vatican's elite protectors, stand in uniforms so colourful, so theatrical, that most people see only a Renaissance costume. But what if those stripes and plumes are not decoration at all, but a secret language woven into cloth? For over 500 years, these guards have stood at the gates of power, their uniforms unchanged while the world transformed. Every button, every cuff, every plume carries whispers of loyalty, sacrifice, and hidden codes. Some say the colours are just borrowed from noble families. Others believe they are markers of blood, faith, and eternity stitched into living symbols. This is not just fashion. It is theatre, catechism, and cipher. A design meant to be read as much as it is seen. Yet while tourists snap photos of the bright stripes, few realise they are looking at a uniform that speaks in silence, telling a story that stretches from the sack of Rome in 1527 to the secret archives of today. So before you dismiss it as pageantry, ask yourself, what if the Vatican's most photographed uniform is actually a code, one hiding loyalty, obedience, and the weight of history in every fold of fabric? Like the video, subscribe, and tonight we decode the strange symbols of the Swiss Guard uniforms. Beneath the blazing sun of St. Peter's Square, tourists lift their phones to capture the most colourful guards on earth. Bright stripes of blue, red, and yellow blaze against the pale stone of the Vatican, a pattern so strange it seems almost theatrical. But what if these uniforms, more than just fabric and thread, are a message written in plain sight? What if every colour, every cut, every stripe is part of a code designed not only to dazzle the eye but to whisper secrets about loyalty, power, and faith? The Vatican has never been shy about spectacle. Processions, incense, chants, all are meant to touch the senses and anchor belief. The Swiss Guard uniforms, often called the most photographed in Europe, may be the most visible piece of this theatre. Yet few stop to ask, why these colours, why this design, and why has it remained almost unchanged for centuries? Colours in history were never random. Blue was once the shade of royalty and heaven, a dye so rare it had to be mined from distant lands. Red signalled blood, sacrifice, and the courage of martyrs. Yellow, often linked to the sun, was the colour of light and divinity. Woven together in bold stripes, they form a living flag. But a flag of what? Loyalty to the Pope, certainly. But perhaps also a memory of families like the Medici, who ruled Florence in the 15th century, whose colours were nearly identical. Could it be that the guards who vow to defend the Pope with their lives also wear, stitched into their uniforms, a hidden reminder of the worldly powers that once made the Vatican strong? The story goes that Michelangelo himself designed the uniforms. Guides repeat it to tourists as fact, yet historians doubt it. Records point instead to Renaissance tailors and commanders who wanted their soldiers to appear both fearsome and divine. So why attach the name of the great artist? Because the name gives the uniform an aura of genius, a touch of the sacred, even if the truth lies elsewhere. And this is where the real mystery begins. The stripes are vertical, bold, impossible to miss. But look closer. Their rhythm mimics the fluted columns of Roman temples. Their spacing creates visual order, suggesting not chaos, but discipline, a body turned into architecture. It is a walking symbol, a uniform that transforms a guard into a living pillar of the church. Tourists see colour, but insiders see geometry. Even the helmets, gleaming black with sweeping plumes, are not mere protection. They recall the Morian crown, a nod to the Virgin, while the feathers serve as silent signals of rank and role. Every detail is part of a script the guards themselves learn, but never reveal. So here is the question. Are the Swiss Guard uniforms simply pageantry, a quaint medieval costume preserved for tradition? Or are they a cipher, a code dressed in wool and leather, declaring the authority of the Vatican to those who know how to read it? Every stitch seems to say, we are not only soldiers, We are symbols. And in a world built on spectacle, symbols often hold more power than swords. Step through the iron gates of the Vatican, and you enter a world that feels frozen in another time. The air itself seems to hold its breath as a guard in striped colours takes his post, halberd resting against his shoulder, eyes fixed straight ahead. Tourists shuffle past, whispering, smiling, sometimes laughing at the bright costume. Yet the guard does not move. Not a blink, not a twitch, only silence. Behind him rise the massive colonnades of St. Peter's Square, a stage designed by Bernini in the 17th century to embrace the faithful like open arms. On this stage, the Swiss Guard perform their role, but not in words. They perform it through presence, through stillness, through a ritual discipline that speaks without sound. At certain hours, a ceremony unfolds. The changing of the guard is not casual like in other armies. It is deliberate, precise, every step measured, every hand movement rehearsed. The click of boots against stone echoes like a drum beat. Each gesture, from presenting the halberd to saluting with the hand, feels almost theatrical. Yet it is not theatre for entertainment. It is theatre of power, reminding anyone who watches that the Vatican is not simply a church, it is a sovereign state with its own army, its own secrets, and its own language of symbols. Inside the gates, life is stricter still. Guards live under a rule of silence, devotion, and obedience. Their day begins early, often before sunrise, with prayer and drill. Weapons are polished, uniforms inspected, every thread and buckle checked for perfection. To wear the colours is not enough. One must embody them, become them. A sloppy guard would dishonour centuries of tradition and a vow sworn on oath day, a vow that promises to defend the Pope with life itself. Walk deeper into the courtyards, and you see the rhythm of discipline repeated everywhere. A guard practicing the exact turn of a halberd, another drilling the slow ceremonial march, another standing outside the apostolic palace, unmoving even in the burning heat of an Italian summer. Their bodies are trained to resist discomfort, to stand longer than ordinary men, to remain silent when crowds laugh or jeer. Every moment is a ritual that separates them from the rest of the world. And yet, for all its discipline, there is still mystery. Why such elaborate ceremony in the 21st century? Why not a simple uniform and a modern salute? The Vatican does not explain. It allows the spectacle to speak for itself. It is left to the viewer to wonder if the colours and rituals are meant only as tradition, or if they still carry messages that only insiders can read. The question lingers long after you pass the gates. Are the guards merely protectors, or are they also symbols, silent actors in a story that stretches back to the year 1506 when the first Swiss soldiers arrived? Every step they take, every moment they stand in stillness, seems to suggest the answer is more complicated than it appears. The year was 1506. Rome was a city caught between glory and danger, its streets filled with pilgrims, merchants, and soldiers from every corner of Europe. The Pope at the time, Julius II, feared enemies both within and beyond the walls of the Vatican. He needed protectors who would not bend to Italian politics or Roman corruption. His eyes turned north to the mountains of Switzerland, where young men were famous for their strength, discipline, and loyalty. From there came a small group of 150 soldiers, carrying halberds and wearing simple gear, their journey across the Alps, a march of both endurance and destiny. When they arrived, the people of Rome saw not just mercenaries, but men who looked different, spoke different, and yet carried themselves with a pride that demanded respect. Their purpose was not simply to fight, but to stand close to the Pope, to be his living shield. That day marked the birth of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. But what began as a military contract soon grew into something far more symbolic. These men swore an oath unlike any other. They vowed to give their lives for the Pope, not only as a political leader, but as the vicar of Christ. To break that oath was to betray not just a man, but God himself. Words alone could not contain such devotion, so the oath became something written into fabric and steel. The uniform evolved from plain soldiers' clothes into a language of its own, colours and patterns stitched into meaning. Every stripe of red recalled blood and sacrifice, every blue echoed heaven and loyalty, every yellow shimmered with light and divinity. It was no longer just clothing. It was a code, a visual alphabet of faith and power that could be read by anyone standing before them. Over the centuries, the oath ceremony itself became ritualized. Even today, every new recruit stands before the Pope on the 6th of May, the anniversary of the sack of Rome in 1527, when 147 guards gave their lives defending Clement VII. Each recruit raises his hand and swears to protect with life, to serve with loyalty, and to remain faithful until death. The gesture, the words, and the uniform fuse into one language, a language of loyalty that needs no translation. To outsiders, the uniforms may look like theatre. To the guards, they are reminders of the blood spilled, the vows spoken, and the centuries of memory they now carry on their shoulders. In that way, the birth of the Swiss Guard was not only the creation of a bodyguard unit, it was the beginning of a code that continues to this day. A code that tells the world, through colours and cloth, that these men are more than soldiers. They are symbols, their very presence speaking louder than any sword. Stand in St. Peter's Square and watch the Swiss Guard march by, and the first thing that strikes you is not their weapons or their discipline, but their colours. Bold bands of blue, red, and yellow explode in the sunlight, so vivid they almost feel unreal. Tourists often laugh and call them costumes from a carnival, but behind the brightness lies a debate that has lasted for centuries. Are these colours a secret nod to one of the most powerful families in Renaissance Italy, or are they nothing more than practical military choices meant to stand out on the battlefield? The Medici family, rulers of Florence for much of the 15th and 16th centuries, left their mark across Europe. Their wealth, art patronage, and political influence helped shape the very identity of the Vatican. The Medici coat of arms often displayed striking colours, and some historians argue that the blue, red, and yellow of the Swiss Guard uniforms echo those family shades. If true, it would mean that every guard standing watch today carries on his shoulders a living memory of a dynasty that once controlled not only Florence, but also the papacy itself. In this view, the uniform is a stitched reminder of political alliances and the worldly powers that secured the Vatican's survival. Yet there is another explanation, one that feels less like hidden code and more like soldiers' logic. In the chaos of a battlefield, visibility was survival. Soldiers needed to recognize their comrades instantly. Bright colours cut through the smoke of gunpowder and the dust of marching feet. Red warned enemies of aggression, blue marked loyalty, yellow shone like sunlight. Together, the palette turned a company of men into a moving flag, impossible to mistake and unforgettable to anyone who saw it. Even today, the uniforms ensure that a guard can never be overlooked, not by tourists, not by dignitaries, and not by those who might threaten the Pope. But there is still something strange about the exact combination. Few armies in Europe at that time used such a bold triad. It was not camouflage in the way we understand it now. It was a statement, a declaration that these soldiers were not ordinary mercenaries. They were defenders of the Church, and their colours would shine even in death. The Vatican has never confirmed one story over the other. Guides tell visitors it is Medici heritage, while military historians insist it is tactical visibility. Perhaps the truth is both. Perhaps the colours were chosen because they served the double purpose of honouring powerful allies while making sure no one could miss the Pope's soldiers in a crowd. And maybe that is the secret of the Swiss Guard uniforms. Their brilliance is not accidental. It is a fusion of politics, faith, and strategy woven into fabric. Every time the sunlight catches those stripes of blue, red, and yellow, the guards remind the world that they are both protectors and symbols, carrying a palette that refuses to be forgotten. Ask almost any visitor to the Vatican who designed the Swiss Guard uniforms, and many will answer with confidence, Michelangelo. The idea is repeated in guidebooks, whispered by tour guides, and accepted without question. It feels right, after all. Who else but the genius who painted the Sistine Chapel and carved the David could have imagined such striking colours and bold design? Yet, when historians look for proof, the trail grows thin. Michelangelo Buonarroti lived from 1475 to 1564, a time that overlapped with the founding years of the Guard. He was indeed working in Rome under Popes Julius II and Leo X, both of whom valued spectacle and might have wanted their soldiers to stand out. But nowhere in his vast collection of sketches, letters, or contracts does a single reference to Guard uniforms appear. He designed fortifications, he sculpted, he painted, he engineered, but did he ever tailor? The evidence says no. So, how did his name become tied to these uniforms? Part of the answer lies in myth-making. Michelangelo's reputation was so immense that attaching his name to anything gave it instant authority. By the late 16th and 17th centuries, when the uniforms had begun to settle into their recognizable form, people may have retroactively credited him to lend the design a sense of genius. To say a tailor or commander created it would sound ordinary. To say Michelangelo did was to lift the garments into the realm of art. Another possibility is that later artists, influenced by his style, built a look that felt Michelangelesque. The vertical stripes echo the rhythm of classical columns, much like those Michelangelo used in architecture. The bold colour contrasts match the drama of his frescoes. The rigid geometry recalls his fascination with balance and proportion. Even if he never held a needle, his artistic spirit might have inspired those who did. Yet, there is danger in believing legends too easily. When we repeat that Michelangelo designed the uniforms without proof, we give up the chance to ask deeper questions. Why did the Vatican allow such a story to flourish? Was it to sanctify the guards, to make them seem more like art than soldiers? Or was it simply convenient, an easy tale for guides to tell in a square full of tourists? The truth is far more intriguing than the legend. The uniforms we see today were most likely codified in the early 17th century under Commander Caspar Roest, and later refined by tailors who worked closely with papal officials. They were not the work of one genius, but of a long tradition, shaped over decades until the garments became a language of their own. The myth of Michelangelo still clings to them because it is simple, beautiful, and easy to believe. But sometimes the truth that a uniform was born from many hands and many years carries even greater weight. It reminds us that symbols are not always the vision of a single master, but the slow weaving of history itself. The 16th century was a time when clothing spoke louder than words. Across Europe, nobles and soldiers alike wore garments that were not just fabric, but coded messages, announcing rank, wealth, and allegiance to anyone who knew how to read them. This was the age of slashes, panes, and stripes, where clothing became a kind of secret language. To modern eyes, the Swiss Guard uniforms may look like playful costumes, but to people of the Renaissance, they were instantly recognizable signals, each cut and color chosen with meaning. Slashing was one of the boldest styles of the era. Soldiers and nobles cut openings into their outer garments to reveal bright fabrics underneath. At first, it may have been born from necessity, when Swiss mercenaries patched torn clothing with stolen cloth after battles. But over time, it evolved into fashion, a way to flaunt wealth by showing you could afford multiple layers of fine fabric. In the guards' uniforms, these slashes survived as colourful panes that let red blaze through blue or yellow shine from beneath dark stripes. They were not random decorations. They carried the memory of victory and survival, turning practical repairs into a symbol of triumph. Stripes, too, were powerful. In the Renaissance, bold stripes stood out in a world where most peasants wore plain, muted colours. To dress in such striking patterns was to declare yourself above the ordinary, a man of status, wealth, or service to someone important. For the Swiss Guard, the vertical bands of blue, red, and yellow became more than design. They were unit identifiers, a uniform code that told the world these were not just mercenaries. They were soldiers of the Pope, chosen and sworn by oath. The cut of the garments also mattered. Wide sleeves and layered breeches gave a sense of power and volume, exaggerating the body into something larger than life. In battle or ceremony, this created the image of a man who was more than a man, a living banner of the church. The uniform was designed to project strength before a single weapon was raised. Even buttons, cuffs, and collars played roles in this visual code. Their placement was deliberate, creating symmetry that reflected the Renaissance obsession with order and balance. To wear such clothing was to participate in a world where everything, even stitches and seams, carried meaning. The Vatican understood this better than anyone. In an era when authority depended on spectacle, soldiers had to look like symbols. The Swiss Guard were dressed not only to fight, but to communicate, to silently declare their loyalty, their status, and their connection to the highest power in Christendom. Today, tourists may only see colour and pattern, but hidden within those stripes is a language first written 5 centuries ago. It is a language of discipline, triumph, and devotion, born in the Renaissance and still spoken every time a guard takes his post beneath the towering columns of St. Peter's Square. Stand in the middle of St. Peter's Square and let your eyes settle on the Swiss Guard, and one detail above all others commands your attention: the stripes. Bold vertical bands of blue, red, and yellow, running head to toe like beams of painted light. They are impossible to ignore, almost hypnotic in their rhythm. Why vertical? Why so striking? To understand, we need to step back into the language of symbols that shaped the Renaissance. Vertical lines have always carried meaning. In art and architecture, they draw the eye upward, suggesting height, authority, and even connection to the divine. The columns of Roman temples and the soaring pillars of cathedrals all used verticality to make the human mind feel small in the presence of something greater. The stripes of the guard uniforms echo this same rhythm. A guard does not just stand in front of the Vatican, he becomes part of its architecture, a living column in the open-air temple of St. Peter's Square. From a distance, the stripes also serve a practical purpose. In the chaos of crowds or battle, vertical bands create instant readability. The human eye catches the pattern quickly, separating friend from foe. In the 16th century, when smoke and confusion clouded fields, these stripes made the Pope's soldiers unmistakable. Even today, among thousands of tourists, the guards are visible from far away, the stripes guiding your gaze like signals across stone. There is also a hidden logic to their colour rhythm. Blue paired with red, yellow paired with blue, the sequence creating not randomness but order. It is a repeating code, a silent language of loyalty and rank. Some say the wider stripes on certain garments once hinted at seniority, while narrower bands marked the common soldier. Whether or not this remains true today, the impression of rank and discipline is still clear. The body of each guard is visually divided into precise, equal parts, suggesting balance, order, and control. Nothing is left to chance. Beyond visibility and rank, the stripes tell a psychological story. They elongate the body, making a man appear taller, stronger, more commanding. When a row of guards stands shoulder to shoulder, the combined effect is overwhelming, a wall of colour and symmetry that radiates authority. In the Renaissance, clothing was never just decoration. It was power stitched into fabric. The stripes turned soldiers into living architecture, disciplined patterns in human form. the Vatican understood the message. These were not mere mercenaries, but guardians transformed into symbols. Today, most visitors see only the brightness of the colours, but beneath the spectacle lies a deeper truth. Each stripe carries centuries of meaning, a reminder that the Swiss Guard were always more than men with weapons. They were designed to be seen, to be read, to be remembered. Their stripes are not costume, but code, vertical lines that tie them to the eternal pillars of Rome and to the unshaken authority of the church they defend. Look closely at the Swiss Guard uniforms, and you may think you see only colour and stripes. But behind the fabric lies something far more deliberate. The uniforms are not just stitched together for beauty or tradition. They are built on hidden geometry, a careful mapping of proportions that echoes the sacred mathematics of the Renaissance. Every cuff, every pleat, every tabard seems to fall into patterns that whisper of balance and order, a design that mirrors the very architecture of the Vatican itself. During the 16th century, artists and architects were obsessed with proportion. They studied ancient Roman texts on geometry and believed that numbers were not just tools but reflections of divine harmony. The same ratios used to raise domes and carve marble found their way into clothing. In the uniforms of the Swiss Guard, the human body becomes another kind of building wrapped in lines that transform flesh and bone into geometry. Consider the cuffs. They are not merely decorative flares of fabric. Their size and layers are calculated to create rhythm, repeating like the beats of a measure in music. 3 folds, 5 folds, 7 folds, numbers that carried symbolic meaning in Renaissance thought. Each time a guard raises his arm, the folds mark not only motion but measure, as though his movements are choreographed by mathematics. The pleats on the breeches and tabards follow the same logic. They divide the body into segments, a grid laid out over the human form. This division was more than aesthetic. It suggested discipline, the idea that even a soldier's body was subject to order and control. To the trained eye, these divisions recall the golden ratio, that mysterious number that appears in shells, flowers, and the Parthenon. Whether intentional or instinctive, the uniforms echo this ratio in their spacing, creating harmony that feels pleasing even if the viewer cannot explain why. Tabards, the long panels that fall from the shoulders, complete the design. Their proportions match the vertical rhythm of columns, turning the guard into a walking facade. The width of the tabard against the width of the shoulders is not random. It mirrors the ratios used in church altars and doorways, thresholds between ordinary space and sacred space. When a guard stands at his post, his very body becomes a doorway, a living threshold between the Pope and the world. Tourists may not see these grids and ratios, but they feel them. The eye is drawn to symmetry, to balance, to order that calms and commands. The Swiss Guard uniforms radiate these qualities because they were crafted in an age when design was inseparable from meaning. Hidden within their folds is a silent message. Loyalty is not chaos, service is not disorder, and devotion is measured as precisely as geometry itself. The guards are not only soldiers, they are living equations, human embodiments of harmony, stationed at the heart of the Vatican, where heaven and earth are believed to meet. Angles whisper where colours shout. Look closely at the Swiss Guard uniforms, and beyond the bold vertical stripes, you will notice sharp diagonals cutting across sleeves and breeches. These angled lines form chevrons, patterns that to the untrained eye seem decorative, but to a soldier's mind speak an older language. In the world of heraldry and military symbols, the chevron has long been a sign of rank, movement, and protection. It is an arrow that points the way, a mark of direction stitched into cloth. During the Renaissance, clothing was often designed to be read as well as worn. Stripes suggested order, slashes hinted at triumph, and chevrons, those V-shaped angles, became a symbol of motion. On the sleeves of the guards, they draw the eye down to the hands, the instruments of service and defence. On the breeches, they point toward the legs, the source of march and movement. Every angle seems to remind the guard that his body is not his own, but dedicated to the path of duty. In medieval coats of arms, the chevron represented the roof of a house, shelter, and guardianship. When painted on shields, it suggested both strength and direction, pointing upward as if to heaven. To see them reborn in the Swiss Guard uniforms is no coincidence. These men were brought to Rome to be both roof and shield for the Pope. The chevrons stitched into their garments are more than style. They are visual vows, lines of fabric that quietly repeat the oath of loyalty. The chevron also carries the rhythm of marching. When a company of guards moves in unison, the repeating V-shapes create an illusion of arrows in motion, a silent flow of colour that suggests forward drive, even when the soldiers stand still. This was no small detail in the 16th century, when armies were expected to project strength before the first strike of battle. A wall of chevrons was a wall of momentum, an unspoken promise of action. To modern visitors, the chevrons may seem hidden beneath the blaze of stripes, easy to overlook in photographs. But once you notice them, they change how the uniform feels. Suddenly, it is not only colourful but directional, filled with angles that guide the gaze. They point, they push, they whisper of purpose. The Vatican thrives on such layers. It knows that symbols do not need to shout when they can lean into the subconscious. A tourist might forget the story of a battle or the name of a pope, but the sight of a soldier marked with arrows of cloth will leave an impression of guardianship, of someone who stands ready to move when called. That is the secret of the chevrons. They are not decoration. They are motion frozen in fabric, martial whispers stitched into sleeves and legs, arrows that forever remind both the guard and the world of the path he has sworn to follow. Buttons are small things, easy to overlook when faced with the blaze of colours that cover the Swiss Guard uniforms. Tourists point to the stripes and the plumes, but few ever stop to count the buttons lined neatly down the chest, the sleeves, and the cuffs. Yet in the world of the Vatican, nothing is ever placed by chance. Each button is not just a fastener, but a marker, a breadcrumb in a trail of meaning that stretches back through centuries of ritual and devotion. Soldiers of the Renaissance were no strangers to decoration. Buttons gleamed not only as practical closures, but as signs of wealth and discipline. In the Swiss Guard, the buttons form lines so precise they almost resemble beads on a rosary, each one inviting the question, why this number, why this placement? Some historians argue the counts mirror liturgical cycles, sequences of sevens and 12s that echo the days of creation, the apostles, or the months of the year. To wear such numbers on the body would be to carry prayer stitched into cloth, a silent reminder that every movement of the guard takes place within sacred time. Others believe the alignment of buttons was linked to military order. A guard's body, divided by rows of gleaming discs, could symbolize ranks, commands, and the chain of loyalty. Just as a commander arranges men into formations, a tailor arranges buttons into patterns, turning the soldier into a walking map of obedience. The line of buttons down the chest is the most striking. Perfectly centered, it divides the body like a spine of discipline, a vertical line that keeps left and right in balance. It is a reminder that the guard himself must be balanced, not swayed by distraction or fear. His very stance mirrors the symmetry that runs through his uniform. On the cuffs and sleeves, the buttons take on another meaning. They encircle the wrists like rings, drawing attention to the hands that hold halberds and swords. Each button is a reminder of control, a visual tether keeping the weapon and the man bound together in duty. Even the shine of the metal was chosen with care. In the sun, the buttons flash like stars, tiny sparks of light against the deep fabric, catching the eye of those who watch. They guide the gaze, leading it up and down the uniform in deliberate rhythm, like following a string of notes in a song. To dismiss them as mere decoration is to miss their true function. The buttons are part of a code, a numeric language hidden in plain sight, connecting the guard to cycles of prayer, structures of command, and the eternal need for order. They are breadcrumbs for anyone willing to follow, leading back to vows sworn in the year 1506 and repeated every May when new guards take their oath. In a uniform where every detail matters, the buttons remind us that even the smallest piece can carry the weight of centuries. The human neck has always been a place of vulnerability, a point where power and humility meet. In the Swiss Guard uniforms, the collar is more than fabric. It is a signal of obedience, a mark that the man wearing it has given his voice, his strength, and even his life to the service of another. The neckline of the uniform closes high and tight, encircling the throat like a yoke. To most people, it may seem like simple tailoring, a way to finish the garment neatly, but in the language of symbols, it speaks of submission. The guard does not stand as an individual, but as part of a hierarchy, his collar binding him visibly to duty. In Renaissance, clothing collars were often extravagant, ruffs that flared outward in circles of lace and linen, signs of wealth and self-importance. The Vatican chose something different. The Swiss Guard collars are disciplined, restrained, or functional. They frame the head without overwhelming it, suggesting not pride but service. To cover the neck in this way is to remind the soldier and the viewer alike that his words and breath belong to the Pope he defends. The yoke, the part of the uniform that stretches across the shoulders, adds another layer of meaning. In farming, a yoke is the wooden beam laid on oxen to harness them to the plough. In Scripture, the yoke often symbolizes obedience to God's will. To cut and sew a garment with a distinct yoke is no coincidence. It is a tailor's way of reminding the guard that his strength is not free. It is directed, guided, and restrained for a purpose greater than himself. Together, the collar and yoke transform the guard into a living statement of hierarchy. The head is bound, the shoulders are harnessed, and the body is offered to service. No matter how bright the stripes or how sharp the weapons, the uniform begins at the neck with humility. Even the act of buttoning the collar is ritualized. Every morning when a guard dresses, he closes the neckline and in doing so renews his vow. The snug fit against the throat is a daily reminder that his life is not his own. Tourists may never notice this detail, but the guard feels it every moment, especially during long hours of standing motionless in the heat or cold. The collar presses lightly but constantly, a physical echo of the oath taken on the 6th of May each year. In a world where fashion often expresses freedom and individuality, the Swiss Guard collar does the opposite. It erases freedom in favour of obedience. It silences individuality in favour of unity. That is its power. The neckline and yoke are not decoration. They are the first layer of discipline, the quiet sign that the man inside the uniform has surrendered himself completely to the role he plays in the eternal theatre of the Vatican. One of the most striking details of the Swiss Guard uniforms is the slashing. Strips of fabric are cut open so that a second colour shines through, creating a layered effect of light and shadow. To modern visitors, this may look like flamboyant Renaissance fashion, a kind of showmanship meant to dazzle the eye. But behind these cuts lies a story older and darker, one that connects torn cloth with wounds, sacrifice, and the memory of blood. The fashion of slashing began on the battlefields of Europe. Legend says Swiss mercenaries, after a hard-fought victory, repaired their torn garments with pieces of fabric taken from enemies. The patches created jagged openings that revealed bold colours beneath. What began as necessity soon became style. Nobles across Europe copied it, paying tailors to slash their clothes in elaborate patterns, turning battlefield scars into signs of triumph. In the uniforms of the Swiss Guard, this history is preserved. Each slash is not random decoration. It is a memory of battle, a reminder that their origins lie in the blood and dust of war. Yet in the Vatican, the meaning deepens. The cuts in the fabric resemble wounds, and the colours revealed beneath are red, blue, and yellow. Red recalls the blood of martyrs. Blue suggests heaven and loyalty. Yellow glows like light itself. Together they tell a story of sacrifice, that beneath the surface of service lies suffering endured for faith. The slashes become more than style. They become a theology stitched into wool. Renaissance audiences would have recognized this. To see a guard in slashed garments was to see a man marked by wounds, his uniform carrying the memory of sacrifice even in times of peace. It was a visual sermon, reminding the faithful that loyalty to the Church required blood and endurance. The Vatican, master of spectacle, understood how powerfully such symbols worked. To this day, tourists may not know the origin of slashing, but they feel its effect. The uniforms seem alive, colours breathing through the cuts, as though the guards themselves are living reminders of both glory and pain. There is also a paradox in these designs. Wounds usually weaken, yet here they become strength. Cuts that should destroy the garment instead make it more beautiful. In this way, the uniform reflects a Christian idea, that through suffering comes redemption, through wounds comes victory. The guard who wears it becomes both soldier and symbol, a man whose very clothing tells the story of sacrifice. The slashes and pains of the Swiss Guard uniforms are not simple decorations of a past age. They are living motifs, scars of fabric that recall the wounds of battle and the blood of faith. They whisper that service is not easy, that protection of the Pope is not only honour but danger. Every opening in the cloth is a silent reminder that loyalty has a cost, and the cost is written not in words, but in wounds made visible to the world. Look down to the wrists of a Swiss guard, and you will see layers of fabric shaped into cuffs that flare outward like petals of a clock. They are not plain or hidden, but carefully folded, stacked, and aligned as if they were keeping time on the very body of the soldier. To most people, they are nothing more than stylish ends to a sleeve. Yet when you begin to see the Vatican as a world built on rhythm and ritual, the cuffs start to look like more than decoration. They look like markers of time, silent reminders that the life of a guard is measured not by personal choice, but by cycles of duty, prayer, and tradition. Time has always been sacred within the Church. Bells ring to call the faithful to prayer, seasons shift through Advent, Lent, and Easter, and every day is divided into hours of devotion. The cuffs on the guard uniforms seem to echo this order. Their layers repeat like the turning of a calendar, folds stacked one upon another in measured sequence. Each layer may be read as a reminder of the liturgical seasons, the endless return of sacred time that guides the rhythm of life within the Vatican. To wear these cuffs is to carry the calendar on your arms, to move through hours and seasons every time you lift your hand. But the symbolism does not stop there. Guards live by rotation, standing post for hours at a time before another replaces them. The cuffs could be seen as visual markers of this rhythm. Fold upon fold, shift upon shift, the cuffs remind the guard that his duty is one link in a chain of service that never ends. The clock of the Vatican does not stop, and neither does the chain of guards who keep watch. There is also the more personal connection to prayer. Monks once divided their days into canonical hours, moments when they paused to lift their minds to God. The cuffs, with their repeating folds, echo this division. They whisper to the guard each time he lowers his eyes or clasps his hands that his service is not only military but spiritual. He stands not just for the Pope, but within the hours of devotion that have guided the faithful for centuries. Even the way the cuffs catch the light suggests the passage of time. Sunlight strikes their edges at different angles as the day advances, shadows shifting across the layers like the movement of a sundial. The fabric itself becomes a clock, its folds speaking of hours slipping by as the guard remains still. Tourists may see only style, but hidden in the cuffs is a reminder that the Vatican is not ruled by seconds or minutes, but by sacred cycles. For the guard who wears them, each fold is a tether to duty, a reminder that his life is measured by service, by prayer, and by the endless turning of time within the eternal walls of the Holy See. At the center of every Swiss Guard uniform is a line that holds the entire form together, the belt. Wrapped tightly around the waist, it is more than a strip of leather. It is the line of duty, the point where the uniform shifts from colorful display to controlled function. The belt divides the body into upper and lower halves, just as duty divides personal life from service. To put it on is to be bound, not only in fabric but in responsibility. In the Renaissance, belts were never just tools. They carried swords, daggers, and pouches, and in doing so they defined a man's role. For the Swiss Guard, the belt cinches the flowing fabric into a disciplined shape, transforming the bright colours into a silhouette of authority. Without it, the uniform would balloon with loose energy. With it, the soldier becomes compact, restrained, ready. The line of the belt is both practical and symbolic. Above it lies the chest, where the heart beats loyalty to the Pope. Below it are the legs, the engines of movement and march. The belt stands between them, the binding force that keeps loyalty and action aligned. It is a reminder that devotion without action is empty, and action without devotion is reckless. Together, held by the belt, they form unity. From the belt rises the baldric, a strap slung diagonally across the chest. Historically, it carried the weight of a sword or halberd, distributing the burden across the body. In symbolic terms, the diagonal line cuts across the bright vertical stripes, like a scar, reminding the guard that duty is not a straight road, but a cross to bear. The baldric transforms the guard into a living symbol of both burden and readiness, a man marked by responsibility. Then there is the sword knot, a detail easily missed by the casual eye. Hanging from the hilt, it secures the weapon to the hand, ensuring it cannot slip away in combat. But in the language of symbols, it says something deeper. The guard and his weapon are bound together, his hand tied to his oath. He cannot let go of duty without breaking the very knot that secures him. The combination of belt, baldric, and knot creates a web of lines across the body, carving the uniform into order. They are not random straps, but deliberate markers, guiding the gaze and shaping the silhouette into balance and strength. They bind colour into discipline, turning display into defence. To the outsider, they may seem like small details, but to the Vatican they are visible reminders that service is never free. It is carried, strapped, and knotted onto the very body of the guard. In the stillness of St. Peter's Square, the belt glints in the sun, the baldric slices across bright fabric, the sword knot dangles with quiet promise. Together, these lines declare that the guard is not a man of leisure, but a man of duty, his life cinched, crossed, and bound by the role he has sworn to uphold. When sunlight strikes the Swiss Guard in St. Peter's Square, the blaze of colour is crowned by something darker, the Morian. This black lacquered helmet, polished to a mirror sheen, curves upward with a ridge like the spine of a mountain. At first glance, it looks purely medieval, a throwback to a past age of pikes and muskets. But the Morian carries a history all its own, a story of Spanish lineage, Marian devotion, and hidden signals carried by its crest and plume. The Morian first appeared in the 16th century, most famously worn by Spanish soldiers called conquistadors. Its open face and high comb offered both visibility and protection, a helmet designed for long campaigns and endless marches. To see it on the heads of the Pope's personal guard is no coincidence. It tied the Vatican to the power of Spain, then the mightiest Catholic kingdom in Europe. By placing a Spanish-style helmet on the Swiss Guard, the Church declared its alliance with forces that stretched across continents. The ridge along the top of the helmet is more than a practical reinforcement. To many eyes, it resembles a crown, and within Vatican symbolism, it has long been linked to the Virgin Mary, often called the crowned Queen of Heaven. To wear the Morian was to carry not just steel, but a Marian echo, a silent reminder that their protection was offered not only to the Pope, but to the Mother of the Church herself. In this way, the helmet became less of a war tool and more of a sacred crown, transforming the guard into both soldier and servant of heaven. Then comes the crest and plume, details that breathe life into the otherwise somber black. A plume of feathers, red, white, or black, depending on rank and ceremony, rises from the helmet like a flame. These plumes were never random. In Renaissance armies, feather colours carried clear meaning, signalling unit type or role. For the Swiss Guard, they became part of a visual hierarchy, silent signals that could be read instantly by insiders. To the crowd, they may look like decoration, but to the guards, they are codes, declaring authority without a word. The combination of lacquered black and bright feather creates a striking contrast. Black swallows light, feathers catch it together, making the guard's head both shadowed and radiant. It is a dual image, one of strength and humility, of martial power tempered by sacred duty. Tourists see a curious antique helmet, but in truth, the Morian is a message in metal. It ties the guard to Spain's Catholic Empire, crowns him in Marian devotion, and signals his role with the sweep of a plume. More than protection, it is a badge of identity, a crest that declares to the world that these men are not merely soldiers in stripes, but guardians marked by history, faith, and a code carried even in the steel that crowns their heads. High above the bright stripes of the Swiss Guard uniform, the plume rises, swaying in the Roman breeze. It is the final touch on the Morian helmet, yet it is also one of the most important signals a guard can carry. Made of feathers, sometimes soft white, sometimes blazing red, sometimes deep black, or even mixed, the plume is not decoration for its own sake. It is a language, one that speaks silently of rank, post, and ceremony. To the casual tourist it looks like flair, but to the Vatican it is code. In Renaissance armies, plumes were practical identifiers. On smoky battlefields and crowded squares, soldiers could be recognized by the feathers on their helmets. Each color had meaning, allowing commanders to direct men quickly and avoid confusion in the chaos of war. That tradition has never died. The Swiss Guard still use plumes as visual shorthand, instantly revealing who is who within their ranks. The white plume, tall and striking, is reserved for the commander and his senior officers. When it appears in St. Peter's Square, it is a symbol of authority, a visual crown that marks the man in charge. Red plumes, bold as fire, often belong to captains and higher ranks. Black plumes, by contrast, speak of ordinary duty, the daily service of standing guard at gates and doors. On certain occasions, mixed plumes appear, blending colours to signal special roles or ceremonies that carry unique weight. The feathers also carry the rhythm of ceremony. At the swearing in of new recruits on the 6th of May each year, plumes of red and white fill the square like a forest of flames and light. During solemn funerals, the feathers darken, shifting the tone to mourning. At Easter and Christmas, bright plumes catch the sunlight, becoming part of the pageantry that frames the Pope's appearance. Each change whispers to those who know the code that something important is happening, even before the words of ritual are spoken. Beyond hierarchy and ritual, the plume adds life to the otherwise rigid form of the guard. The stripes of the uniform are strict and geometric, but the feathers bend and sway with every step. They remind viewers that these are not statues, but men, alive and breathing, carrying centuries of tradition on their shoulders. The Vatican understands the power of this contrast. The plume softens steel. It crowns discipline with elegance. It draws the eye upward like a flame rising toward heaven. It is no accident that in sunlight the feathers glow, turning the guard into something more than a soldier. They become part of a living symbol, a page of history still turning. The plume speaks without sound, its colours carrying messages that outsiders may never fully read. But even without translation, the effect is clear. The guard crowned with feathers is no ordinary soldier. He is marked, ranked, and set apart. In the Vatican, even a single feather can tell a story centuries old. Look closely at the details of the Swiss Guard uniforms, and you will find symbols stitched, pressed, and carved into their fabric and metal. Among them, none appear more often than the papal keys. Two keys crossed, one of gold and one of silver, sometimes crowned by the papal tiara. To tourists, these emblems may blur into the decoration, but to the Vatican, they are declarations of power, quiet reminders woven into every layer of the Guard's life. The keys represent the authority of Saint Peter, the first pope, who according to scripture was given the keys to heaven itself. One key opens the earthly realm, the other unlocks the divine. Together, they stand for papal supremacy over both worlds, a claim that has shaped the very identity of the Catholic Church for nearly 2,000 years. On the Swiss Guard uniforms, the motif is not displayed like a banner, but hidden in plain sight, etched into buckles, stamped into buttons, and embroidered into fabric. The placement is deliberate. A guard wears the keys not on a flag far away, but on his own body, binding him into the symbol of papal power. Every time he straps his belt or fastens his cloak, the keys are there, whispering a reminder that his duty is to defend not just a man, but an office that claims divine authority. The papal tiara often appears above the keys, a triple crown that represents the Pope as Father of Kings, Governor of the world, and Vicar of Christ. Though the tiara is rarely worn today, its image still lingers in the details of the Guard's gear. To place it above the keys is to assert that earthly and heavenly realms alike bow under the papal crown. It is subtle, but in a world built on ritual and repetition, subtlety is often more powerful than spectacle. Who are these symbols meant to remind? Certainly the guards themselves. Each morning, as they put on their uniforms, they clothe themselves in the authority of the papacy, but also the crowds. Tourists may not notice every emblem, yet the repetition of the keys across walls, gates, uniforms and flags builds a message that is impossible to miss. The Vatican holds the keys, the Pope is the gatekeeper, and the Swiss Guard are the watchmen stationed at the door. In this way, the crossed keys are not simply art. They are assertion, a claim carried in silence. They remind enemies that no attack is merely against a city, but against the symbol of heaven's gatekeeper. They remind allies that loyalty to the Pope is loyalty to the divine order itself. And they remind the guards that their own lives are linked to the most enduring emblem of papal power. In the bright sun of Rome, the stripes of the uniforms may draw the eye first, but it is the small keys, hidden and repeated, that carry the true message. They are the Vatican's way of saying the door to heaven has a lock, and only one authority holds the power to open it. Symbols often hide in the folds of history, stitched into fabric where only the careful eye will notice. Among the emblems that appear in connection with the Swiss Guard, two stand out for their persistence and mystery, the lion and the lily. They are not splashed across the uniforms as boldly as the stripes or the plumes, but they whisper from crests, embroidery, and heraldic references that link the Guard to the larger story of Europe. To understand them is to see how the Vatican wove politics, alliances, and virtues into the very language of clothing. The fleur-de-lis, the stylized lily, has long been the mark of France. It crowned banners of kings, adorned shields, and signified both purity and divine favour. In Christian symbolism, the lily has always represented the Virgin Mary, her innocence, and her role as the flower of heaven. To place this emblem near the Swiss Guard is to remind the world that their service is not only martial, but Marian, linked to purity and to the blessing of the Mother of God. Yet, the fleur-de-lis is also political. In the 15th and 16th centuries, France was both ally and rival to the Vatican, and displaying its emblem was a way to signal connection to power, while also borrowing the prestige of one of Europe's great monarchies. Some believe its presence in Swiss Guard iconography echoes Florence as well, a city whose own emblem was the lily, red against white. Florence was home to the Medici family, the very dynasty that produced several popes. To carry the lily, then, was to signal loyalty not just to divine purity, but to dynastic power. the lion carries a different weight. Rampant and fierce, claws raised, it was one of the most common beasts in heraldry. In the language of symbols, the lion stood for courage, vigilance, and sovereignty. In Christian interpretation, it could signify Christ himself, the Lion of Judah, or the fierce guardian of the faith. In Florence, the Marzocco lion became a civic emblem, standing proudly with the lily to declare the city's independence and strength. When the Vatican drew on these images, it was not by accident. The guard who stood in stripes of blue, red, and yellow might also be cloaked in layers of heraldry that connected him to the values of courage, purity, and dynastic allegiance. These symbols were shortcuts, a kind of visual code. In an age when few could read, a lily or lion stitched into fabric could tell a whole story in an instant. To the faithful, it said purity and Christ's protection. To the powerful, it said alliance with France and Florence. To the guards themselves, it whispered of the virtues they were expected to embody, purity like the lily, courage like the lion. Today, most visitors to St. Peter's Square never see these details. Yet within Vatican walls, the symbols remain, reminders that even beasts and flowers can become part of a language of power. The lion roars silently, the lily blooms eternally, and both continue to speak from the fabric of history. At first glance, the gloves and boots of the Swiss Guard may seem like minor details, practical additions to complete a soldier's uniform. Yet in the Vatican, almost nothing is ever only practical. Every edge of the body is marked, framed, and controlled. The gloves, covering the hands, and the boots, enclosing the feet, are boundaries. They separate sacred from profane, duty from freedom, touch from temptation. In them lies a theology of limits, a reminder that even the smallest part of the guard's body is consecrated to service. Hands have always carried symbolic weight. They bless, they strike, they hold weapons, they write laws. To cover them with gloves is to discipline them, to declare that these hands do not belong to ordinary life. In medieval courts, white gloves were signs of purity, often worn during ceremonies to show the absence of corruption. For the Swiss Guard, gloves transform the hand into something less personal and more official. When a guard grips his halberd, it is not a man grasping wood and steel, but the office of protector itself. The covering creates distance, a boundary that turns human touch into ritual touch. Boots carry a similar meaning for the feet. In ancient traditions, removing shoes marked holy ground, but here the opposite is true. The guard must keep his feet enclosed, armoured against the dust of the world. The boots create separation between the holy space of the Vatican and the profane ground beyond its gates. Each step in those black leather boots is an act of guarded entry, declaring that the man who walks here is set apart from ordinary travellers. Their shine and firmness also communicate discipline. Feet are symbols of journey, of movement, of freedom. By binding them into boots polished and strict, the guard gives up his freedom of movement. He no longer walks where he pleases. He marches where he is ordered. Even the way the boots echo on the marble floors of Vatican halls is part of the performance. The sharp sound is not just noise but rhythm, a reminder of order in every step. The combination of gloves and boots creates a frame around the body. The extremities, where contact with the world is most immediate, are bound. Nothing of the bare hand or naked foot is shown. This reinforces the idea that the guard exists not as an individual but as a vessel of duty. He is set apart, not to mingle freely but to serve within boundaries. The theology of touch is simple yet profound. To touch is to connect, to make real. By covering hands and feet, the Vatican reminds both guard and observer that his connections are not casual. Every grip, every step is sacred and controlled. Tourists may see only polished leather and clean fabric, but behind those coverings lies a world of meaning. The gloves and boots whisper that even the edges of the guard's body belong to something greater than himself. His touch and his journey are not his own. They are bound to the service of the Pope and the sacred walls he defends. In the stillness of St. Peter's Square, among the shuffle of tourists and the echo of prayers, the Swiss guards stand with weapons in hand. At first, the halberds and swords may seem like relics, ceremonial tools meant only for show in a modern age. Yet these blades and poles are not only instruments of combat, they are symbols that speak without words. Their steel becomes semaphore, lines drawn in the air that the eye reads instantly as warnings and boundaries. The sword has always carried layered meaning. Strapped to the side of a guard, it is more than sharpened steel. Its horizontal line slices across the vertical rhythm of the uniform, creating a cross of cloth and blade. To see it is to remember authority, the power to defend, the right to strike. Even when the sword remains sheathed, its presence is enough to whisper that peace is maintained by readiness. The Vatican does not need to display armies of guns. A single sword at the hip of a brightly dressed guard already tells the story. The halberd is even more striking. Its long wooden shaft, topped with axe and spike, turns the guard into a living exclamation point. Held upright, it extends the body into impossible height, a line that pulls the gaze upward as though pointing to heaven itself. Angled across the chest, it forms a barrier, a diagonal wall that no tourist dares to cross. More than weapon, it is a visual command, a signal to stop, to respect, to recognize the space as sacred. The silence of the guards adds to this effect. They do not shout orders or bark commands. Their stillness, amplified by the cold gleam of steel, does all the speaking. The halberd becomes a mute warning. The sword becomes a line of restraint. Together they project power without sound. Visitors feel the message in their bones, even if no word is spoken, that this is a place guarded, that the Pope is protected, that behind the bright colours lies real strength. In Renaissance warfare, weapons were not just tools, but signs of identity. A halberd told you the soldier's role, his training, his allegiance. In the Swiss Guard uniforms, that tradition endures. The weapon is part of the language of dress, as essential as stripes or plumes. It is no accident that the halberd remains the symbol of the Guard, even in an age when firearms exist. The Vatican knows that steel carried in silence speaks louder than modern rifles hidden away. Tourists take photos of guards with halberds because they sense something timeless. The weapon connects them to a world where lines of steel defined order. In that sense, the sword and halberd are not relics, but signals, semaphores of protection. Visual lines that carve space into sacred territory. Their presence says, what no speech could, that within these walls time bends, power endures, and the guardians of the Pope stand ready with weapons that speak in silence. Behind the heavy doors of Vatican walls, away from the gaze of tourists, the Swiss Guard train. Their movements are not only exercises in discipline or combat readiness, they are rituals, carefully choreographed drills that transform soldiers into living diagrams. Every step, every turn, every clash of heel on marble is measured, echoing shapes that carry meaning older than the guard itself. To watch them is to see circles, crosses, and thresholds drawn not on parchment but on the ground, patterns of devotion traced in silence. The circle is one of the most basic forms in their drill. Guards march in loops, pivoting around central points, creating a rhythm that echoes the eternal. In Christian thought, the circle is without beginning or end, symbolizing both God and the cycle of sacred time. Each time the guards repeat these loops inside the chapel, they are not just practicing formations. They are embodying eternity, their steps weaving them into the rhythm of faith itself. The cross is another figure hidden within the drill. When guards march in opposite directions and then intersect, they create the shape of the cross across the floor. It is not accidental. Their halberds cross as well, metal striking metal in carefully timed rehearsals. Each clash is a reminder of the intersection between earth and heaven, body and spirit, life and sacrifice. The cross becomes not a drawn symbol, but a lived one, carved into space by men in motion. Thresholds emerge each time the drill moves from one chamber to another. Passing through a doorway is not treated lightly. The shift is marked by small rituals of pace and posture, as if crossing invisible boundaries. In doing so, the guards reflect the deeper truth of the Vatican itself, a place built on thresholds between sacred and secular, ancient and modern, visible and hidden. Their drill encodes this truth in movement, teaching them to recognize every doorway as a passage into higher duty. For the guards themselves, the repetition is more than physical training. It becomes a rhythm that shapes the mind. Hours of practicing circles and crosses engrave patterns of order into thought. Their bodies learn obedience while their spirits absorb the hidden symbolism. To the outside eye, it is a military routine. To the insider, it is a sacred dance, a way of binding the body into the story of the church. The silence of these drills is as powerful as the movements. Commands are spoken softly or signaled by gesture. The real voice is in the synchronized steps, the sound of boots striking stone, the echo of order resonating in the chapel's high ceiling. In that silence, the shapes they create become almost mystical, diagrams alive for a brief moment before dissolving into memory. The chapel drill is not merely about readiness to protect, it is about transformation. It turns men into symbols, uniforms into geometry, and space into sacred diagram. The guards do not only stand for the Pope. Through their drills they become part of the living architecture of the Vatican itself. The Swiss Guard are most often remembered for their dazzling Renaissance uniforms, the stripes of blue, red, and yellow glowing in the Roman sun. Tourists take pictures, convinced that this is how they always look, as if the guards lived their entire lives dressed for a painting. But the truth is more complex. There is not one uniform but several, and the changes between them reveal a hidden story of function, hierarchy, and purpose. To guard, to process, and to drill are three different roles, and each requires its own form of dress. The ceremonial uniform is the one everyone knows. It is the full spectacle, with puffed sleeves, bold stripes, cuffs, and ruffled collar, topped with the black Morian helmet crowned by its plume. This uniform is designed to be seen, to command attention, to serve as a symbol of the Vatican's glory. When the Pope greets crowds or great processions cross St. Peter's Square, this is the attire on display. It is not meant for speed or battle. It is a pageant of faith stitched into fabric, a living reminder of the 16th century brought into the present. In contrast, the field uniform is far simpler. Dark blue tunics, berets, and practical gear replace the flamboyant colours. This is what the guards wear when their job is long hours of watch or patrol, away from the flash of cameras. Here, the emphasis is on endurance and efficiency. The field uniform strips away the symbolism of slashes and plumes, leaving only the essence of duty. It whispers instead of shouts, but its very simplicity reveals the hidden truth that behind the spectacle lies real vigilance. The drill uniform lies somewhere between. When guards train in courtyards or chapels, practicing formations and movements, they wear versions that balance tradition with practicality. There may still be stripes, but lighter fabrics and adjusted tailoring allow for motion. Weapons in hand, boots striking marble, they do not need to dazzle an audience, but to embody precision. The drill uniform reveals the guard as more than decoration. It exposes the structure beneath the ceremony, the machinery of discipline that keeps the spectacle alive. The swaps between these uniforms are not casual. They reveal what role is being played in the Vatican's Great Theatre. When a guard stands before tourists in bright colours, he is a symbol. When he walks a quiet corridor in dark blues, he is a shadow of protection. When he trains in modified dress, he is a diagram of order. The variations remind us that the Swiss Guard are not frozen relics, but living men, shifting between image and action depending on need. The Vatican understands the power of this contrast. The brilliant stripes tell the world of continuity and faith, but the field uniform whispers of readiness. Both are necessary, both are true. What changes in the fabric reveals what never changes in the duty. The guard remains the same, even when the colours fade into shadow or rise again in blazing display. The brilliance of the Swiss Guard uniform is not only in its design but in its making. Beneath the blaze of stripes lies a quiet truth, the choice of materials and methods that have endured for centuries. In an age of mass production and synthetic fabrics, the Vatican still insists on wool, lining, and hand stitching. Each uniform is crafted not for convenience, but for continuity, as if every thread were a vow to resist the pull of modern shortcuts. Wool may seem an old-fashioned choice, heavy and warm in the Roman sun, yet it carries meaning beyond comfort. Wool breathes, it lasts, it holds its shape. More importantly, it ties the guard to a tradition that stretches back to the 16th century, when soldiers marched in garments woven from sheep's fleece. By keeping this material, the Vatican declares that service to the Pope is not about ease but endurance. To wear wool in May heat or January chill is to embody discipline, to show that the body bends to duty rather than demanding comfort. The linings add another layer of symbolism. Hidden from the eye, they provide structure and support, the quiet strength beneath the brilliant surface. Just as the Church teaches that invisible faith upholds visible ritual, so the lining holds the uniform together without being seen. Every guard knows it is there, felt against the skin, a reminder that what lies within is as important as what shows without. To use cheap substitutes would betray this balance, but to use hand-stitched linings is to honour the unseen. Hand-stitching itself is perhaps the most telling choice. In a world where machines could produce hundreds of uniforms in days, each Swiss Guard uniform is still measured, cut and sewn by skilled tailors. The process is slow, deliberate and exacting. It is not only about clothing men for service, it is about crafting garments that carry memory. Each stitch links present guards to generations who wore the same patterns, binding them into a chain that refuses to break. In this way, the uniform becomes a kind of living relic, as sacred in its making as in its wearing. Even the colours, dyed deep into wool, resist fading. They are chosen not only for brightness, but for resilience, so that under sun, rain, or candlelight, they remain as bold as the vows sworn each year. When the guard stands watch, his fabric is preaching a sermon. It says continuity is stronger than convenience. It says tradition is more powerful than trend. It says faith is not about what is easiest, but about what endures. Tourists may marvel at the design, but those who look deeper will see the materials telling their own story. Wool, lining, and stitches whisper of loyalty that cannot be mass-produced, of service that resists erosion. The guard wears not just a uniform, but a testament. Every thread declares that what matters most in the Vatican is not what is fast or easy, but what is lasting, and the fabric that endures is the fabric of loyalty itself. Deep inside Vatican walls, away from the crowds of St. Peter's Square, there is a quieter workshop where the true guardians of the Swiss Guard uniform work not with halberds or swords, but with needles and chalk. This is the in-house atelier, a tailor's sanctuary where fabric becomes scripture and patterns are passed down like sacred texts. Here, the uniform is not just sewn, it is preached, guarded, and transmitted as carefully as any gospel. The process begins with pattern books, heavy volumes filled with shapes and diagrams that resemble architectural blueprints more than clothing designs. Each page holds the secret to turning wool into the striped armour of loyalty. These books are not for public eyes. They are guarded with the same seriousness as manuscripts in the Vatican Library, because within them lies the code of continuity. Alter the pattern too much, and the language of the uniform would break. Preserve it, and the guard remains forever recognisable, no matter the century. measurements are treated with equal reverence. Every recruit is carefully measured, not only for size, but for posture and stance. The tailor records these numbers in a system that is as guarded as any archive. To know the dimensions of a guard's body is to prepare him for service, but also to tie him into the lineage of those who wore the same stripes before him. The tape measure here is not just a tool. It is a key that unlocks the transformation of a man into a symbol. Apprentices who enter this atelier do not simply learn how to cut and stitch. They are initiated into a tradition. They work under masters who teach slowly, piece by piece, as if passing down a gospel. Every fold, every slash, every stripe is explained not only in terms of fashion but of meaning. To slash cloth is to recall wounds. To align stripes is to echo Roman columns. To sew cuffs is to mark time itself. In this way, tailoring becomes catechism, each garment a sermon stitched into fabric. The atmosphere of the atelier reflects this weight. Rolls of wool stand like pillars, spools of thread gleam like beads on a rosary, and the rhythm of scissors cutting fabric echoes like chants in a chapel. Silence is often kept, broken only by the scrape of chalk or the hum of needle against cloth. It is as if the work itself is prayer, a devotion carried not in words but in stitches. What emerges from this hidden workshop is more than a uniform. It is a vestment of loyalty, created through rituals of measurement, preserved in guarded pattern books, and handed down from master to apprentice like scripture from pulpit to pew. Tourists may never see this room, but without it the Swiss Guard would be costumes instead of symbols. The atelier keeps the gospel alive, thread by thread, ensuring that the message of duty, sacrifice, and continuity is carried not only by the men who wear the uniforms, but by the very fabric that clothes them. In the clear light of Rome, the Swiss Guard uniforms seem to change colour before the eyes. At dawn, the stripes glow deep and solemn, heavy with shadow. By midday, they blaze with fire, red burning against yellow, blue slicing like a river through flame. At sunset, they soften again, almost fading into the marble of St. Peter's Basilica. This is not just the trick of cloth. It is the way the Vatican itself has been designed, a theatre of stone, gold, and light, where even the guards become part of the play. The Vatican is built on contrasts. Pale travertine stone reflects light with a brilliance that makes colours leap forward. The stripes of the uniform, already bold, become sharper when framed against these luminous walls. Red appears brighter, yellow glows almost like gold, and blue darkens into velvet. Yet move the guard into shadow beneath a colonnade, and the same fabric shifts. Colours dull, stripes blur, and the man seems to melt into the architecture, half seen like a figure from an old fresco. The illusion is deliberate. The Church has always known how to use light as a tool. In its basilicas, shafts of sun pierce darkness at calculated angles, gilding altars and icons at just the right moment. The guard uniforms function the same way. In blazing sun, they dazzle, proclaiming authority. In shadow, they retreat, whispering mystery. The fabric becomes a canvas for the Vatican's greatest artist, the Roman light itself. Gold, the other constant element of the Vatican, plays its role too. Gilded ceilings, candlesticks, and papal vestments echo the yellow of the stripes, making the guard blend seamlessly into the sacred decor. He is no longer separate from the stage, but part of it, as though the uniform was designed not just for the man, but for the place. The blue stripes, cooler and darker, provide balance. Against gold, they ground the eye, reminding viewers that beneath the glory lies stability. The optical play of light and architecture transforms the guard into a shifting icon. At one moment he looks radiant, almost too bright for the eye. At another he looks subdued, nearly swallowed by shadow. This duality mirrors the Vatican's own message, both radiant in power and hidden in mystery. What makes the effect powerful is that it works unconsciously. Pilgrims and tourists may not analyze the changes in color, but they feel them. The guard seems larger, smaller, brighter, dimmer, depending on where he stands. The Vatican has turned fabric into theatre, dressing its protectors in costumes designed not only for loyalty, but for illusion. The Swiss Guard uniforms are not fixed paintings. They are moving stained glass, bending light into messages. They tell of power and humility, of presence and concealment, of continuity in a world where nothing stays the same. In sunlight and shadow, the colours whisper that the Vatican does not simply exist within Rome. It commands the very light that falls upon it, and the guards, wrapped in stripes, carry that command on their own bodies. Hierarchy in the Swiss Guard is not announced with loud titles or shouted commands. It moves quietly through the ranks, visible to those who know how to read the signs. To the casual visitor in St. Peter's Square, all guards may look the same, bright stripes and solemn faces, but beneath the surface lies a silent system of rank, communicated through subtle tells that speak louder than words. These markers of authority are stitched into the very fabric of the uniform, carried in the tilt of a plume, the cut of a glove, the knot of a sword. Start with the plume. At first, it may seem like simple decoration, feathers swaying in the breeze. Yet its colour and height speak volumes. A tall white plume often crowns the helmet of a commander, drawing the eye upward like a banner in battle. Red plumes mark captains and higher officers, while black feathers often belong to ordinary guards. To the untrained eye, it may look like a forest of colours, but within the Vatican, this is a coded map of authority. One glance is enough to know who leads and who follows. The gloves too hold meaning. Some are plain, functional, designed for long hours of standing watch. Others carry more elaborate stitching, a sign of elevated status. The way they are worn also matters. Officers may slip them off ceremonially when issuing orders, creating a visual contrast between command and service. To the guards themselves, these details are not fashion but signals, as clear as stripes on a soldier's sleeve. Even the gait, the way a guard walks, reveals rank. Ordinary guards are trained to move in step, measured and identical, so that individuality disappears. Higher ranks, however, may carry themselves with a distinct confidence, their movements slower, deliberate, signalling authority through posture. In this way, rank is visible in the rhythm of the body, a silent conversation of steps on the stones of Vatican courtyards. The sword knot is another hidden code. A simple leather tie may bind the weapon of a junior guard, while officers may carry knots more ornate, braided with care, sometimes tipped with tassels. These knots are not merely practical, they are signs of ownership and identity. To see an officer's sword knot is to glimpse his place in the hierarchy, a thread of authority woven into the weapon itself. What makes these signals powerful is that they are quiet. The Vatican thrives on spectacle, yet within the guard, the real authority is conveyed in whispers of fabric and gesture. The silence is intentional. It reflects the Church's ancient preference for ritual over noise, for order that does not need to declare itself. Tourists may never notice the difference between one glove or another, between one plume or another. But the guards know. They have been trained to read the silent hierarchy, to see command in the smallest detail. In this way, the Swiss Guard remains not only disciplined, but encoded, a living language of rank that speaks without words. Every year on the 6th of May, the Swiss Guard gather in the Vatican courtyard for the most important moment of their service, the oath. Before the eyes of the Pope and the crowd, each recruit raises his hand and swears loyalty, vowing to protect the pontiff with his life. The ceremony is solemn, emotional, and steeped in history, but the power of the moment is not only in the words spoken, it is also in the uniform itself. Cuffs, collars, and threads turn the invisible promise into visible grammar, binding oath and fabric together so that the vow is worn every day thereafter. The collar frames the guard's face like a seal, a boundary between voice and body. When the words of the oath are spoken, the collar seems to hold them, catching the promise and fixing it into place. Historically, collars have symbolized obedience and service, wrapping the neck like a yoke of duty. For the guard, it is no different. To wear the collar is to remember that once, in front of witnesses, he spoke words that chained his freedom to loyalty. The collar is not loose but structured, a constant reminder that his voice is no longer his own but dedicated to the service of the church. The cuffs carry another layer of meaning. Flared and layered, they resemble pages of a book or the turning of time itself. On Oath Day, when hands are raised in pledge, the cuffs become visible punctuation to the gesture. They declare that these are not casual hands, but consecrated ones. Each fold is like a thread binding the oath into the body, marking time from that day forward as a life lived under vow. The hands that wear these cuffs may one day hold weapons or stand at rest, but they will always be cuffed in memory of the words spoken on the 6th of May. The thread that stitches the entire uniform also plays its role. Every seam is hand-sewn, every stripe aligned with care. For centuries, this work has been done by tailors who know that they are not simply making clothes. They are weaving promises into fabric. Once a man takes the oath, he does not just wear wool, he wears his vow. The stitches hold more than cloth. They hold history, sacrifice, and the gravity of loyalty. Even the act of putting on the uniform after Oath Day becomes ritual. It is like slipping back into the words once spoken, clothing the body with promise again and again. For outsiders, the oath may seem like a single dramatic moment each year. For the guards, it is ongoing. It is stitched into collars that frame their voices, into cuffs that encircle their hands, into seams that bind fabric to skin. The oath becomes grammar, written not with ink, but with thread, worn daily as both burden and honour. Every raised hand, every fastened button, is a silent repetition of that vow, proving that the promise made in the courtyard does not end with the ceremony, but continues in the fabric of life itself. Every year, beneath the Roman sky, the Swiss guards step into a drill that is not only training but remembrance. Their movements recall the darkest day in their history, the sack of Rome in the year 1527. On that day, mercenary armies stormed the city, and 147 guards stood their ground against overwhelming force. Almost all were killed, but their sacrifice allowed Pope Clement VII to escape into the safety of Castel Sant'Angelo. It was not a victory in numbers, but it was a victory in loyalty, a moment that would define the identity of the Guard forever. Today, that memory is not left to books or speeches. It is carried in the body, reenacted through drill like a living liturgy. When the guards form up in the courtyard, their steps follow the rhythm of battle. Lines advance, halt, and turn as though enemies were still at the gates. Halberds rise and fall in patterns that echo the chaos of that long-ago day, yet the movements are clean, precise, and deliberate. Each clash of weapon and stomp of boot is less about combat readiness and more about engraving memory into muscle. The choreography becomes a kind of resurrection, bringing the sacrifice of 1527 into the present. The reenactments also teach the younger recruits, who may only know the story in words. To march the drill is to feel the weight of history pressing on the shoulders. When a recruit raises his halberd and steps into formation, he is stepping into the role of those who once gave their lives on the cobblestones of Rome. It is not just practice, but communion across centuries, a way of sharing burden with brothers long gone. Even the silences between movements carry weight. The stillness, after a pivot, the pause, before a weapon strike, mirrors the silence of the fallen. It is as though absence itself has been written into the drill, reminding every guard that they march not alone but in the shadow of those who stood before. Tourists who witness the ceremony often see only colour and spectacle, but for the Vatican, the choreography is a tool of memory. Without it, the story of the sack of Rome would risk fading into history. With it, the sacrifice remains alive, beating like a second heart beneath the stripes of the uniform. The Vatican understands that memory dies when it is not embodied. That is why the drill is not optional. It is an act of loyalty, not to tactics, but to time. In every clash of halberd and every synchronized step, the Guard declares that what was given in 1527 will never be forgotten. They turn loss into ritual, defeat into identity, silence into meaning. The drill of memory ensures that the Swiss Guard are not simply keepers of the Pope, but keepers of their own story, carrying it forward not as dusty history, but as a living dance of loyalty and sacrifice. To most eyes, the Swiss Guard look as though they have stepped directly out of the Renaissance. Their puffed sleeves, striped breeches, and black helmets appear untouched by the march of centuries. Yet, beneath the wool and thread lies a quieter truth. The uniforms of today are not the same as those worn in the 16th century. Hidden under history are layers of modernity, discreet protections that never show but always matter. This is where myth meets reality, where Kevlar is stitched under tradition, and the Vatican carefully balances the weight of the past with the dangers of the present. In an age of cameras and constant attention, the Vatican cannot allow its protectors to look like ordinary soldiers in modern armour. That would destroy the carefully crafted image of timeless guardianship. Yet neither can it risk their safety. The compromise is invisible. Bullet-resistant materials are concealed under fabric. Subtle reinforcements are woven into collars and chest pieces. To the tourist, nothing looks different. But to the Guard, the change is felt in the weight and in the quiet reassurance that loyalty is not left unprotected. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is altering the uniform a betrayal of tradition or a necessary evolution of duty? The Vatican answers not with speeches, but with silence. They maintain the outward image exactly, as if the Guards are relics untouched by time. But beneath the surface, stitches adapt, fibres harden, and history bends just enough to survive. It is a paradox. The uniform must remain unchanged, and yet it must also change to endure. Myths thrive on this kind of tension. Tourists and pilgrims continue to believe they are seeing a 16th century army guarding the Pope, frozen in time. And in one sense they are. The colours, the stripes, the plumes are authentic reproductions of Renaissance design, but the Guards themselves carry invisible armour that their ancestors never dreamed of. Kevlar becomes the hidden myth of the modern age, a secret promise stitched into tradition. The ethics of these updates lie in the balance between authenticity and survival. The Vatican chooses to protect without revealing, to keep the illusion while ensuring no life is risked for the sake of costume. In this choice, they reveal how myth works in the modern world. It is not about falsehood. It is about layering truth and story so seamlessly that the eye cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. In the end, the Swiss Guard remain what they have always been, living symbols of loyalty, sacrifice, and endurance. Their uniforms are both old and new, both legend and adaptation. The tourists see history standing guard, and they are not wrong. The Guards feel Kevlar beneath the wool, and they too are not wrong. The modern tweaks do not break the myth, they keep it alive. In silence, in shadow, in invisible fibres, the Vatican has ensured that the guardians of the Pope can walk in history while standing firmly in the present. To see a Swiss Guard is to see more than a man in uniform. It is to open a page of a book written in cloth, metal, and colour. Every element, from the boots that touch the stones of St. Peter's Square to the plume that sways above the helmet, speaks in its own language. Together, they form a text that can be read if you know how to decode it. Start at the ground. The boots are polished black leather, heavy and firm, enclosing the feet in discipline. They say separation, a barrier between the sacred precinct of the Vatican and the profane world outside. Their echo on marble is punctuation, each step a reminder of rhythm and order. Above them, the striped breeches flare wide, bands of blue, red and yellow creating vertical lines that demand attention. These stripes do not only decorate, they declare visibility, reminding all that the guard is both protector and spectacle. The rhythm of the stripes mirrors the columns of Roman architecture, turning the body into a living pillar of the church. The cuffs at the wrists, layered and bright, mark the hands as consecrated tools. They say these are not ordinary hands, but hands that once raised an oath and now grip halberds with solemn duty. The cuffs can be read as clocks, each fold like an hour of prayer, binding daily time into visible form. The collar frames the voice, stiff and high, encircling the neck with a ring of obedience. It whispers that words spoken here are no longer personal but sworn. It holds the memory of the oath taken each May, fastening the guard's voice to loyalty. Moving upward, the belt carves the body at the waist. It is not only to hold sword or pouch, but to divide form into function. It says the guard is bound by duty, girded for readiness. The sword itself, even when sheathed, speaks of authority. It slices the silhouette with its line, a reminder that peace is defended by silent steel. The halberd in hand rises like an exclamation point, commanding space with its vertical thrust. Held across the chest, it forms a barrier, a signal to all eyes that the boundary is real. Above all rests the helmet, the Morian, black and curved, echoing Spanish lineage and Marian crown. It is a shield and a crown, humility and glory combined. On its crest blooms the plume, the final flourish. White, red, or black, the feathers tell of rank, role, and ritual. They are not random decoration, but coded signals, marking who commands, who serves, who stands ceremonial watch. Read from boots to plume, the guard becomes a page alive with meaning. Each element is a word, each gesture a sentence, each stance a chapter in the long story of loyalty. Tourists may only see colours and costumes, but the Vatican has written its authority into fabric. To read the guard is to see that nothing is empty decoration. Every detail is grammar, every thread is text, and the man himself is the living book of the Vatican's enduring message. Every day in St. Peter's Square, cameras rise like a field of mechanical eyes. Tourists snap picture after picture of the Swiss Guard, capturing the blaze of colours, the stiff poses, and the shining plumes. For most, the uniform is a costume, a Renaissance throwback that makes the Vatican look like a living museum. The photos they take reflect this surface view, bright and picturesque, but stripped of the deeper language, stitched into every thread. The tourist's lens freezes image, but often misses meaning. The insider's view is different. For the guards themselves, the uniform is not decoration but code. Every element carries weight, every gesture signals duty, and every silence speaks as loudly as a trumpet. What the tourists see as flamboyant stripes are, to the insider, columns of discipline, reminders of order and continuity. What they think of as comic book feathers are, to the guard, marks of rank and ritual. The outsider photographs the surface, the insider lives the grammar. The way tourists frame their photos often reveals the gap. They pose children next to guards, grinning, as if the soldier were a statue. They crop close on plumes, cuffs, and halberds as ornaments, forgetting that these details are part of a living system of symbols. The photos flatten the guard into decoration, background for vacation albums. But the insider knows the uniform was designed not to flatter, but to command. It is meant to signal boundaries, to remind all that beyond this line lies the sacred, and that entry requires respect. Another thing the photos often miss is silence. Cameras capture stillness, but not the meaning of it. To tourists, the guard is simply motionless, impressive but mute. To the insider, that silence is itself a message, louder than any shout. It says, "This is sacred ground, you are being watched, respect is required." The lens records stillness but not authority. The guard expects this, even relies on it. The Vatican thrives on spectacle, and part of the spectacle is that most visitors leave with images but not questions. They are distracted by colour and pageantry, never noticing the hidden codes of cuffs, collars, buttons, and plumes. The insider accepts this surface view as useful. Mystery works best when it is not fully noticed, yet those who look closer begin to sense the difference. They notice how the guard's gaze never wavers, how the placement of feet is exact, how even the shadow of a plume can indicate role. To them, the uniform begins to reveal itself not as costume but as a language written in silence. In this way, the Swiss Guard exist in two worlds at once. To the tourist, they are photos waiting to be taken. To the insider, they are guardians cloaked in meaning. The camera can capture fabric, but only the careful eye can read the thread, what most miss. The guard expects them to miss. And what they conceal in plain sight is not hidden at all, only waiting for someone to read beyond the lens. Step into St. Peter's Square on a day when the Pope appears, and you will feel it instantly. The space is not random, it is a stage. The great colonnades curve like arms embracing a crowd. The balcony becomes the central spotlight, and at ground level, framing this theatre, stand the Swiss Guard in their striped uniforms. They are not simply soldiers, they are scenery, stage design in human form, ensuring that what unfolds is more than ceremony. It becomes performance, a theatre of power where every colour and every posture is part of the script. The Pope is always the centre of this drama. His white robes glow against the darker tones of stone and crowd, but without contrast, the effect would fade. The guards provide that contrast. Their red, blue and yellow blaze, like living curtains, making the papal white shine brighter. The stripes create vertical frames that draw the eye upward, funneling attention to the figure of the pontiff. Without a word, the uniforms amplify his presence, shaping the experience of the faithful so that their gaze falls exactly where it should. Movement plays a role too. When the Pope enters or exits, the guards shift position with precision, their lines opening or closing like stage wings. They are both barrier and guide, controlling the flow of bodies and focus. To the visitor, it feels seamless, natural. To the trained eye, it is choreography, the same careful timing you would find in a theatre performance. Each pause, each step, is calculated to magnify the central figure while maintaining the illusion of spontaneity. The architecture of the Vatican merges with this staging. Marble columns echo the stripes of the uniforms. Golden ceilings reflect their yellow, shadows deepen their blue. The guards appear less like individuals and more like extensions of the building itself, as though the square has grown living columns to stand among its stone ones. In this way, the Pope is never just a man standing in a crowd. He is framed, elevated, set apart by both place and people. The faithful may not consciously notice this, but they feel it. The colours, the silence, the geometry of lines, all press the mind into recognition of authority. It is theatre that does not confess itself as theatre, and that makes it even more powerful. The guards themselves are trained to embrace this role. They know that their task is not only to protect, but to frame, to become part of the spectacle that makes the Pope appear larger than life. In this performance, their weapons are props, their silence is script, their uniforms are scenery. Together, they build the illusion of timeless continuity and sacred strength. In the Vatican, power does not need to shout, it stages itself. And the Swiss Guard, standing in stripes beneath the Roman sun, are the stagehands and the scenery, ensuring that the faithful see not chaos but order, not vulnerability but majesty. In this theatre, the message is clear. The Church is eternal, the Pope is central, and the guardians at his side are both shield and stage. The Swiss Guard often appear so unique that it is easy to forget they are not the only protectors within Vatican walls. Alongside them stand the Pontifical Gendarmerie, the Vatican's police force, dressed not in flamboyant stripes, but in modern dark uniforms, carrying radios and sidearms. Where the Swiss Guard embody the theatre of history, the gendarmerie represent the pragmatism of the present. Together they form two halves of a whole, one projecting timeless authority, the other ensuring day-to-day security. The contrast highlights what the Swiss design preserves. Other nations too keep ceremonial guards. Britain has the scarlet-coated soldiers at Buckingham Palace, their tall bearskin hats rising like exclamation points against the sky. Denmark's Royal Guard in blue tunics and white belts, Spain's Guardia Real with their polished helmets and red sashes, all serve the same dual purpose, protection and pageantry. Yet, none resemble the Swiss Guard's bold Renaissance attire. Most modern ceremonial units freeze themselves in the 18th or 19th centuries. The Vatican alone keeps alive the visual grammar of the 16th. This choice is not random. It is preservation of a moment when loyalty was tested in blood, when the sack of Rome in 1527 etched sacrifice into the identity of the core. By preserving that era in design, the Vatican keeps alive not only colour but story. Every stripe is a reminder of a time when mercenary soldiers became martyrs of loyalty. Other guards embody monarchy or nation. The Swiss Guard embody sacrifice to faith. Even within the Vatican, the difference is stark. The pontifical gendarmerie, with their discreet uniforms and unbroken anonymity, fade into the background like shadows. They are meant to be efficient, almost invisible, the machinery of modern security. The Swiss Guard, by contrast, are impossible to ignore. They do not blend with their surroundings, but dominate them, turning duty into spectacle. The Vatican could have chosen to modernize their image, but by keeping the Renaissance look, it ensures that visitors never forget they are walking into a place that claims not just centuries, but eternity. In this way, the Swiss Guard preserve more than fabric. They preserve the Vatican's claim to timelessness. Nations may modernize their uniforms to match changing times, but the Church insists that some things never change. To step into St. Peter's Square and see the guards is to step into continuity, a living reminder that the Vatican does not measure itself in decades or even centuries, but in eras. The echoes in other corps only sharpen this point. Where other ceremonial guards remind their citizens of royal power or national identity, the Swiss Guard remind the world of faith's endurance. They are not only protectors, but symbols of what it means to remain unchanged in a world that changes constantly. By standing in Renaissance stripes, while their peers wear modern blues or reds, they whisper the Vatican's message without speaking. Some traditions are too important to alter. Some designs are more than uniforms. They are living history. The Swiss Guard uniform dazzles the eye, but behind its stripes lies a debate that has stretched across decades. Scholars, historians, and even clergy disagree on whether the uniform is mere pageantry or a deliberate catechism stitched into cloth. To some, it is nothing more than Renaissance nostalgia, a costume kept alive to impress tourists and dignitaries. To others, it is a visual sermon, a coded teaching tool designed to transmit theology and loyalty without words. Both sides point to history, but their readings could not be more different. Those who see only pageantry argue that the uniform was born of fashion. In the early 16th century, slashes, stripes, and bright colours were popular across Europe, particularly in courtly and military dress. The Swiss Guard uniform, in their eyes, is simply a survival of that trend, preserved by tradition and resistant to change. They claim the colours have no deeper symbolism than the desire to be seen on the battlefield and to display allegiance through bold hues. For these scholars, the idea of hidden theology in cuffs or collars is reading too much into a design that was never intended to bear such weight. Yet the counter-argument insists that nothing within the Vatican is ever meaningless. Supporters of this view point to the Church's long history of embedding catechism into architecture, painting, and ritual. If a cathedral window can tell scripture through glass, why should a guard's uniform not do the same through fabric? They see the vertical stripes as echoes of Roman columns, the slashes as wounds recalling sacrifice, the cuffs as markers of prayer, and the plumes as signals of hierarchy. To them, the uniform is not just clothing but liturgy, a silent sermon visible to all who enter St. Peter's Square. The debate sharpens when it comes to intent. Critics say the meaning attributed to the uniform was invented later, imposed by romantic historians and eager theologians. Defenders counter that, even if the meanings evolved, the result is the same. The uniform has become catechism, whether or not that was the original design. A symbol's power does not lie only in its birth, but in how it is received and repeated. Another layer of debate centers on the people themselves. Do the guards understand their uniforms as sacred texts, or do they wear them simply as part of duty? Some insiders suggest that training includes awareness of the symbolic dimensions, while others admit that the deeper readings belong more to scholars than to soldiers. In this tension lies the mystery of all ritual. What is pageantry to one is devotion to another. What is costume to a tourist may be catechism to a believer. The Swiss Guard uniform sits precisely in that space, both dazzling fabric and whispered theology, both show and sermon. The truth may never fully settle. Perhaps that is the point. The uniform's power comes not from ending debate, but from sustaining it, from forcing each viewer to ask whether they are looking at decoration or doctrine. And in that question, meaning continues to live. Behind the Vatican walls, beyond the uniforms that blaze in the square, there is a quieter treasure, the archive of patterns. Here the secrets of the Swiss Guard uniform do not live in marble or stone, but in paper, cloth, and memory. The patterns are the skeletons of the stripes, the blueprints that allow tailors to cut wool into the precise forms that have endured for centuries. Without them, the uniform would vanish into guesswork, the language of its fabric lost. These patterns rest in drawers of the in-house atelier, stacked like holy texts. Each piece of paper or parchment holds outlines for sleeves, collars, cuffs, and breeches, carefully marked with notes and measurements. They look simple to the untrained eye, lines and curves drawn with chalk or ink, yet within them lies continuity, the fragile thread that ties the 21st century guard to his 16th century ancestor. The drawers themselves are locked, not because the patterns are jewels or gold, but because they are more dangerous to lose. A missing diamond could be replaced. A lost pattern would erase a chapter of history. Beyond the paper, oral law plays its part. Tailors train apprentices by memory, as much as by diagram, teaching how a sleeve should fall, how stripes should align, how slashes must be cut to reveal colour without weakening the cloth. These lessons cannot always be written down. They are passed mouth to ear, hand to hand, like secrets whispered in confession. If one generation were to fail in transmitting them, the uniform would lose not only accuracy, but meaning. The danger of lost measurements haunts the workshop. Unlike factory clothes, each guard's uniform is cut for his body, adjusted for height, build, and stance. The archive keeps these measurements like a silent registry, numbers that record not only fabric but the men themselves. To lose them would be to lose continuity, breaking the careful line between man and garment, oath and cloth. The Vatican knows that memory can be as fragile as paper. Fires, floods, or neglect could destroy centuries of preservation. That is why the archive is treated like relics, maintained with reverence. The tailors who guard it are not only artisans but archivists, protecting not fabric but heritage. When a new uniform is cut, the past awakens. The tailor draws from the drawers, recalls from memory, stitches from tradition, and the guard steps into a design that is both present and ancient. Tourists see only the finished product, bright stripes under Roman sun. They do not see the quiet drawers where patterns sleep, or hear the oral lessons spoken in hushed tones between master and apprentice. Yet it is here, in this hidden archive, that the Swiss Guard truly endures. The uniform lives not only in wool and thread, but in fragile maps, guarded memories, and whispered teachings. The danger of loss makes every stitch precious, every drawer sacred. For as long as the patterns are preserved, the Guard remains eternal, but without them, history itself would fade into silence. At the end of every thread, at the heart of every stripe, lies one final truth. The Swiss Guard uniform is not only clothing, it is a code, a cipher, stitched to speak without words. The colours, the cuts, the silence, and the discipline all converge into a message that has endured since the year 1506, when the first guards swore their oath to the Pope. That message is fidelity, loyalty so absolute that it survives death, change, and even time itself. To stand before a guard is to see this code embodied. The blue recalls the Medici who first secured the guard for the Vatican, but it also whispers of faith in the heavens. The red blazes with sacrifice, blood shed in the sack of Rome and in centuries of silent service. The yellow glows with light, the gold of sanctity and continuity. Together, they are not random decoration, but a trinity of meaning, woven into every sleeve and breech. The cut of the fabric speaks the same language. The vertical stripes enforce discipline, binding the body into a rhythm that mirrors the columns of Rome. The cuffs circle the wrists like clocks, reminding the guard of time measured in hours of prayer and in years of service. The collar frames the voice in obedience, holding the memory of an oath spoken once yet lived daily. Even the plume, rising from the helmet, signals fidelity, its height and colour proclaiming both rank and unity. Discipline is the first cipher of the uniform. Every seam, every pleat demands order. To wear it is to surrender individuality to the precision of tradition. Service is the second cipher. The uniform is not comfortable or convenient, but it is a visible chain binding the man to his vow. Time is the third cipher, not only the hours marked in cuffs, but the centuries carried in design. To wear the uniform is to carry the weight of 1527, to embody the sacrifice of those who fell, defending Pope Clement VII, to stand as if their memory is still alive in every button and stripe. This is why the uniform feels timeless. It is not about fashion, but about fidelity to memory, to promise, to the church itself. Outsiders may see only pageantry, yet the insider knows that each day the cloth is worn, the oath is renewed. The guard becomes both soldier and symbol, both man and message. In the silence of their watch, the code speaks. It says, discipline binds you, service defines you, time remembers you. The Swiss Guard uniform is not just history preserved. It is fidelity made visible, a living cipher in colour and cut, declaring without a single word that loyalty endures. And in the end, that is the secret the Vatican has always meant it to keep.